The congressional hearing room felt like a pressure cooker, ready to explode. Governor Greg Abbott sat at the witness table, projecting the confident air of a man who'd spent decades in Texas politics and thought he'd seen it all. His wheelchair positioned strategically at the center, cameras capturing his every move. He leaned into the microphone with the practiced ease of someone who testified before Congress more times than most people could count. Today, he was here to pitch his latest legislative masterpiece, the Community Protection Act, a bill he'd been selling to Texans as the answer to their safety concerns. His opening statement had been smooth, polished, full of the kind of law and order rhetoric that typically played well with his base. "We're simply giving law enforcement the tools they need to keep our community safe," he declared, his voice carrying that familiar mix of Texas swagger and political gravitas. Sitting several seats down the long table, Representative Jasmine Crockett listened with the focused intensity of a trial lawyer spotting holes in opposing counsel's argument. At 42, the Congresswoman from Dallas had built her reputation on two things: exhaustive preparation and an unwillingness to let political spin go unchallenged. While other members of the committee nodded politely during Abbott's presentation, occasionally glancing at their phones or whispering to aides, Crockett sat perfectly still. Her pen moved steadily across her notepad, not taking notes so much as building a case. She'd spent the last 72 hours doing what she always did before high-stakes hearings, reading every single word of the proposed legislation, cross-referencing it with constitutional law, consulting with civil liberties experts, and gathering real-world examples of how similar laws had played out in other states. Governor Abbott had just finished painting a picture of Texas under siege. Rising crime rates, overwhelmed police departments, communities living in fear. The solution, according to him, was straightforward: expand law enforcement authority, create new categories of prohibited conduct, and give prosecutors more tools to protect law-abiding citizens. It all sounded reasonable on the surface, wrapped in the kind of common-sense language that made you wonder who could possibly object to keeping people safe. But Crockett had read past the talking points. She'd seen what was buried in sections 7 through 12 of the bill. Language so broad it could turn a peaceful protest into a felony, transform a critical social media post into criminal activity, and give police the power to shut down any gathering they deemed potentially disruptive before it even started. The committee chairman, looking down at his agenda, announced what everyone in the room had been waiting for. The chair now recognizes Representative Crockett from Texas for 5 minutes of questioning. The room's energy shifted immediately. Journalists in the press gallery sat up straighter. Camera operators adjusted their angles. Even the staffers lining the back wall stopped their quiet conversations. Everyone who'd been following Crockett's rise knew that her 5 minutes of questioning rarely stayed within 5 minutes, and they almost never went the way the witness expected. Before we dive into what happened next, make sure you hit that subscribe button and drop a comment telling us where you're watching from. You're about to witness a master class in how to take apart a political argument piece by piece. And trust me, you won't want to miss a second of this. Crockett adjusted her microphone with deliberate calm, making eye contact with Abbott before she even spoke her first word. "Thank you, Mr. Chairman," she began, her voice carrying clearly through the chamber. "Governor Abbott, I appreciate you taking the time to come before this committee to discuss your Community Protection Act. Before we get into the details, I want to make sure I understand your central argument correctly. You're telling us that this bill is necessary to keep Texans safe. Is that accurate?" Abbott nodded, his expression confident. "That's exactly right, Congresswoman. Public safety is my top priority, and this legislation gives our law enforcement the resources and authority they need to protect our communities." Crockett nodded slowly, as if considering his response carefully. "And you've mentioned several times in your testimony that this is about fighting crime, protecting families, and supporting our police officers. All goals I think everyone in this room can agree are important." "Correct." Abbott's smile widened slightly. "I'm glad we can find common ground, Representative. It was a tactical mistake, and Crockett had led him right into it." "Common ground is always a good place to start," she agreed, her tone shifting just slightly. Still respectful, but with an edge that made everyone in the room lean forward. "So, let's talk about what this bill actually does, Governor. Not the talking points, not the press release version, but what's actually written in the legislation you are asking Congress to federally fund and support." She picked up a thick document, clearly the bill itself, marked throughout with colored tabs and handwritten notes. Section 7 of your Community Protection Act creates a new category of offense called organized disruption. Can you explain to this committee what qualifies as organized disruption under your definition? Abbott shifted slightly, his media-trained smile still in place. That provision is designed to address situations where groups intentionally disrupt public order, block roadways, or interfere with lawful commerce. It's common-sense public safety legislation. Crockett nodded again, flipping to a tabbed page. Let me read you the actual language, Governor, since I think the American people deserve to hear what you're really proposing. She began reading. Organized disruption shall be defined as any gathering of 3 or more persons that creates or has the potential to create interference with normal activities, traffic flow, business operations, or public services. She looked up from the document. Governor, under this definition, couldn't a group of college students protesting tuition increases on a public sidewalk be charged with organized disruption? Couldn't parents gathering outside a school board meeting to voice concerns about their children's education be arrested? Couldn't workers picketing for better wages be prosecuted? Abbott's smile tightened. Those scenarios are hypothetical. They're not hypothetical at all, Governor Crockett cut in smoothly. They're exactly the kinds of protected First Amendment activities that happen every single day in Texas and across this country. And your bill makes them criminal offenses. The room buzzed with murmurs. Several committee members were now actively paying attention, some flipping through their own copies of the legislation. Abbott tried to redirect. Congresswoman, I think you're misinterpreting the intent. I'm not interpreting anything, Crockett interrupted again, her voice gaining strength. I'm reading your words and I'm not done. She flipped to another tab section. Section 9 authorizes law enforcement to disperse any gathering they deem to have disruptive potential before any actual disruption occurs. That's prior restraint. Governor, the Supreme Court has been crystal clear for decades that the government can't shut down speech based on what it thinks might happen. Abbott leaned forward. Representative, with all due respect, public safety sometimes requires public safety doesn't override the Constitution. Crockett fired back, and that's exactly what your bill tries to do. She was just getting started, and everyone in the room could feel it. Let's talk about Section 11. She continued, not giving Abbott time to recover. This section creates criminal penalties for using social media or other electronic communication to coordinate activities that may result in disruption. She looked directly at the camera. Governor, do you understand what you've just criminalized? You've made it illegal for citizens to use Facebook, Twitter, or text messages to organize a protest. You've turned the basic tools of democratic participation into evidence of criminal conspiracy. Abbott's face was starting to flush. Those provisions include safeguards. Where? Plackett challenged. Show me the safeguards, Governor. Because I've read this bill front to back 3 times, and I've had constitutional law professors from the University of Texas, SMU, and Baylor review it. You know what they all said. They said this bill wouldn't survive its first constitutional challenge. They said it's a frontal assault on the First Amendment, and they said it's designed to do exactly what it would do: silence dissent and criminalize protest. The murmurs in the room had grown louder. Abbott tried a different tactic, his tone turning slightly patronizing. Representative Crockett, I understand that as someone newer to Congress, these issues might seem Governor Abbott. Crockett cut him off, her voice sharp as a blade. I'm going to stop you right there. Before I came to Congress, I spent 15 years as a civil rights attorney. I've defended protesters, arrested for exercising their First Amendment rights. I fought unconstitutional laws just like this one in state courts and federal courts. So, please don't insult my intelligence or this committee's time by suggesting I don't understand what I'm looking at. The room went completely silent. Abbott's patronizing expression had vanished, replaced by visible discomfort. Even some of the Republican committee members looked uncomfortable with how the exchange was unfolding. Crockett pressed on, sensing she had him on the defensive. Let's talk about the real-world impact of laws like yours, Governor, because we don't have to guess what happens when states pass legislation that criminalizes protest. We've seen it before. She pulled out a different set of documents. After the George Floyd protests in 2020, at least 17 states passed laws similar to what you're proposing. You know what happened in Oklahoma? Grandmother activists were arrested for gathering outside their state house to oppose education budget cuts. In Florida, environmental activists were charged with felonies for organizing a beach cleanup that included signs about climate change. In Iowa, disability rights advocates were prosecuted for blocking access to a senator's office while protesting cuts to health care. With each example, Abbott's expression grew more tense. Crockett wasn't just making abstract constitutional arguments. She was showing exactly how these laws got used to silence ordinary Americans exercising their rights. But here's what really concerns me. Governor, she continued, her voice taking on a prosecutorial tone, your bill goes even further than those state laws. Section 12 creates civil liability for anyone who provides material support to activities that result in arrests under this act. Do you know what that means? If a church provides water bottles to protesters on a hot day, they can be sued. If a local business lets activists use their bathroom, they can be held liable. If a lawyer provides free legal advice to someone arrested under this law, they can be penalized. She leaned forward. Governor, you're not just criminalizing protest. You're trying to make it impossible for communities to support each other in exercising their constitutional rights. That's not public safety legislation. That's authoritarianism. The word hung in the air like a thunderclap. Several journalists were typing furiously. Camera flashes lit up the room. Abbott's face had gone from confident to defensive to now visibly angry. Representative Crockett, he said, his voice tight, that characterization is completely unfair. And is it? Crockett challenged. Let me ask you directly, Governor. Under your Community Protection Act, could the civil rights marchers who walked from Selma to Montgomery in 1965 have been arrested? Abbott hesitated, clearly recognizing the trap. The historical context is completely different. Answer the question, Governor. Could they have been arrested under your law? Yes or no? The specifics would depend on yes or no, Governor Abbott. It's a simple question. Would the Selma marchers, people fighting for voting rights, the most fundamental democratic right, would they be criminals under your Community Protection Act? Abbott's jaw tightened. The intent of that march and the intent of this bill are completely. That's not what I asked, Crockett pressed. I asked if they could be arrested, and the answer is yes. Under Section 7, they were 3 or more people creating interference with traffic flow. Under Section 9, law enforcement could have dispersed them for disruptive potential. Under Section 12, the churches that fed them and the families that sheltered them could have been held liable. Your bill would have made the civil rights movement illegal. Governor, the room erupted. Republicans tried to call for order. Democrats applauded. Journalists shouted questions. And Abbott sat at the witness table, his carefully constructed political message completely falling apart. Crockett wasn't finished. She held up her copy of the Constitution, a move that had become her signature in confrontational hearings. Governor Abbott, she said, her voice cutting through the chaos. The First Amendment doesn't say Congress shall make no law abridging freedom of speech, unless someone in power thinks that speech is disruptive. It doesn't say the right to peaceably assemble shall not be infringed, unless a governor decides public safety requires it. It says these rights shall not be abridged, period. She pointed at the bill sitting in front of Abbott. This legislation abridges those rights on every page. And you came before this committee trying to sell it as common sense public safety, hoping nobody would actually read what you wrote. Well, Governor, I read it, my staff read it, constitutional scholars read it, and we all came to the same conclusion. This bill is dangerous, it's unconstitutional, and it has no place in a free society. Abbott tried one more time to regain control. Representative, if you would just let me explain the full context. The context, Governor, is that you're asking for federal money to fund a state law that criminalizes constitutional rights, and this committee would be failing in its duty if we gave you a single dollar for that purpose. She looked directly at the committee chairman. Mr. Chairman, I move that we immediately table any consideration of federal support for Texas's Community Protection Act, pending a full constitutional review by the Congressional Research Service. Several Democrats immediately seconded the motion. The chairman, caught off guard by the dramatic turn, called for order and said they'd take the motion under consideration. As the hearing continued with other members asking questions, the damage had been done. Abbott's attempt to present his bill as reasonable public safety legislation had been systematically demolished. News clips of Crockett's questioning were already spreading on social media. Within an hour, Crockett destroys Abbott was trending nationwide. Legal analysts weighed in immediately. Former Attorney General Eric Holder tweeted, "Repeat Crockett's questioning of Gov. Abbott was a clinic in constitutional law and effective oversight. This is exactly what congressional hearings should look like." The ACLU released a statement. Representative Crockett identified precisely why the Texas Community Protection Act poses such a grave threat to civil liberties. We commend her thorough constitutional analysis. Even some conservative legal scholars who had initially supported Abbott's bill began backing away. One prominent conservative law professor told Fox News, "I'll be honest. After hearing Representative Crockett's questioning, I'm deeply concerned about aspects of this legislation I hadn't fully considered. The prior restraint issues alone are constitutionally problematic." By evening, Governor Abbott's office released a defensive statement claiming Crockett had mischaracterized the bill and that he remained committed to public safety. But the political damage was done. Texas state legislators, who had been prepared to pass the bill, suddenly weren't sure. National Republicans who'd planned to introduce similar legislation in their states quietly shelved those plans. 3 days after the hearing, the Congressional Research Service released a preliminary analysis, concluding that multiple sections of Abbott's Community Protection Act raised serious First Amendment concerns and would likely face immediate constitutional challenges if enacted. 2 weeks later, facing mounting pressure and recognizing the bill had become politically toxic, Abbott quietly announced he was revisiting certain provisions of the legislation. Legal observers understood what that meant. The bill was dead, killed not by partisan opposition, but by constitutional scrutiny, and one congresswoman's unwillingness to let dangerous legislation hide behind public safety rhetoric. For Jasmine Crockett, the Abbott hearing became another defining moment in her rising national profile. But when asked about it during a local Texas town hall, she kept her focus on the substance. "I didn't go after Governor Abbott personally. I went after a bill that would have turned constitutional rights into criminal offenses. That's my job. Reading legislation carefully, understanding its real-world impact, and speaking up when something threatens the freedoms Americans hold dear." A constituent in the audience, a grandmother who'd been arrested during a peaceful protest against pollution near her grandchildren's school, stood up with tears in her eyes. "Thank you for reading those bills so carefully," she said. "Thank you for understanding what they really mean for people like me." That moment, captured on someone's phone and shared widely online, encapsulated why Crockett's questioning had resonated so powerfully. She hadn't just scored political points or created a viral moment. She defended the constitutional principles that protect every American's right to speak, to assemble, to petition their government, and to demand better from those in power. If this breakdown of how Jasmine Crockett systematically dismantled Greg Abbott's unconstitutional legislation resonated with you, smash that like button and subscribe for more in-depth analysis of the moments that matter in American politics. Drop a comment below telling us what issue you want to see Crockett take on next. And share this video with anyone who cares about protecting constitutional rights. Your engagement helps us keep covering these crucial stories about defending American democracy.